When you think of ancient Egypt, I bet the first thing that pops into your head is the classic Hollywood version. Massive pyramids, cursed mummies, and Brendan Fraser running from a swarm of killer scarabs. But what if I told you that most Egyptians never even got close to a pyramid? That's right. The life of an average Egyptian was way less Indiana Jones and way more, well, hard work, stale bread, and beer. Let's be real. Hollywood did a fantastic job convincing everyone that ancient Egypt was basically a movie set for pharaohs and ancient curses. But the truth is, 99% of the population was too busy trying to avoid starvation, or getting bitten by a hippo while doing laundry in the Nile. So, forget everything you think you know about ancient Egypt and stick with me, because today we're diving into what life was actually like for everyday Egyptians. No pharaohs, no pyramids, no Tom Cruise trying and failing to reboot the mummy. Hey Discovers, real quick before we dive back in, I've got a small favor to ask. If you love historical curiosities, epic battles, crazy mysteries, and mind-blowing stories that most people don't know about, then hit that subscribe button right now. That way, you won't miss any of our new videos and can keep uncovering insane facts every week. And of course, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and brings you even more awesome content. Alright, let's jump back into history. If you think everyone in ancient Egypt was a slave being whipped while building pyramids, congratulations, you fell for the Hollywood myth. In reality, Egypt was basically a giant HR department, packed with all kinds of workers. It was less Egyptian slaves and more LinkedIn, Pharaoh edition. So, let's check out some of these jobs. The real MVPs of Egyptian society were the farmers. They grew wheat, barley, and flax, making sure everyone had bread, beer, and some seriously questionable clothing. Oh, and guess what? Without them, there'd be no taxes for the pharaoh, so they were basically ancient Egypt's walking paychecks. Artisans were the people who made everything, from giant statues to gold jewelry, furniture, and fancy sarcophagi. If there was an ancient Egyptian HGTV, these guys would be the top designers. Besides protecting Egypt from invaders, the soldiers sometimes got recruited for construction work. Imagine joining the army thinking you'd be a great warrior, only to end up hauling bricks. Here's the big reveal. The pyramid workers weren't slaves. They were paid laborers who got food, beer, and a place to sleep in return. If this were today, they'd have a union demanding better meal vouchers. Ancient Egypt was basically Minecraft in real life. Everyone was building, just without unlimited blocks or creative mode. So, which of these jobs would you have taken? Spoiler: they all paid terribly. A typical Egyptian's life was far less dramatic than the pharaoh and mummy tales portray. If you had visions of gilded temples and incessant feasts, then at the end of the day, reality was more akin to a never-ending cycle of hard work, tough bread, and cold beer. Avoid using snooze buttons or alarm clocks and get up early. You knew it was time to start another long day as the sun rose. Stale bread for breakfast. Containing sand. An ancient Egyptian would most likely cry with joy if they could travel back in time and taste freshly baked French bread. Work. Depending on your occupation, you might spend your day cultivating crops, creating statues, constructing temples, or peddling trinkets at the marketplace. Lunch consists of more bread, dried fish, onions, and beer, of course. Because a drink is the best way to forget a difficult work week. Evening. It's time to relax. Perhaps playing board games, swimming in the Nile, with a 50% chance of surviving, thanks to crocodiles, or arguing with the neighbors about taxes. At night, some people died of fatigue, while others took pleasure in religious celebrations or covert gatherings. Cue the gossipers in the hamlet. It was essentially Stardew Valley on full blast, but without the energy bar, the adorable farmhouse, and a significantly increased chance of dying. If you think your tiny apartment is bad, wait until you hear about ancient Egyptian housing. Small, cramped, and made of mud bricks, these homes were like playing survival mode with no cheat codes. Most homes had just one main room. If you were rich, you might get a tiny second floor. Privacy. Never heard of it. Furniture. Just the essentials. A straw mat to sleep on, a few clay pots, and if you were fancy, a chair. Basically, accidental minimalist decor. No one wanted to turn their house into an oven, So cooking was done outside using stone stoves, so an outdoor kitchen. Bathroom. There was a hole in the backyard, with sand, and shared with the neighbors. Yep. If an ancient Egyptian saw a memory foam mattress, they'd probably worship it as a divine artifact. If you think fast food is awful, consider ancient Egyptian cuisine, which relied heavily on sand as a primary ingredient, as a survival struggle. Bread. Forget about soft bread from the bakery. Due to the poor quality of their grinding implements, Egyptian bread was dry, hard, and frequently covered in sand. Their teeth were practically ruined after years of eating it. Everyone, even children, drank beer. It wasn't your typical IPA though. It was nutrient-rich, viscous, and murky. In essence, a fermented protein shake from ancient Egypt. Fruits and vegetables. Everyday mainstays included dates, cucumbers, garlic, and onions. Fish, dried, salted fish, the ancient equivalent of instant ramen, were abundant in the Nile. Meat. Only during exceptional times. Meat was an uncommon treat unless you were wealthy or worked in a temple. It was like a MasterChef challenge, but with the rule that you could only use stale bread, dried fish, and questionable beer. Egyptians understood how to party despite their difficult circumstances. TripAdvisor reviews for ancient Egypt would read, "Excellent beer, entertaining board games, beware of crocodiles." The options for entertainment were board games, like Senet, was a superstitious variation of chess, where winning indicated good fortune in the afterlife. Music and dancing. Whether it was for religious ceremonies or weddings, Egyptians enjoyed a good jam session with harps, flutes, and tambourines. Festivals were a great way to get away from work, get wasted, and eat for free. Nothing beats relaxing with a beer and a board game at the end of a long day, demonstrating that the idea of after-work relaxation was developed long before 9 to 5. Prepare for a surprise if you believe that ladies in ancient times were confined to their homes all the time. Compared to many later societies, they enjoyed far more rights in ancient Egypt. What were women able to do? Own property. Yes, they were able to purchase, sell, and oversee real estate. An Egyptian woman with a lot of money could afford a home by the Nile. Medical professionals, priestesses, craftspeople, traders, and some even became scribes, very uncommon in other societies, were all employed. Get married and get a divorce. If a husband did something wrong, she may throw him out and take some of the assets. Have status and influence. Some women rose to positions of authority, such as the fabled Hatshepsut, who became pharaoh and ruled more effectively than many males. Egyptian women were out there running enterprises and leading the best life possible, while women in other areas of the world were being kept indoors. Authentic queens. Hollywood's favorite thing to do is to make ancient Egypt into a massive reality show about enslavement and suffering. However, the reality is far more nuanced. Pyramid workers were paid with food, alcohol, and accommodation. They were not slaves. Alright, it wasn't the best pay, but it was respectable at the time. Slavery did exist, but not like in the movies. The majority of slaves were either debtors or prisoners of war. They weren't spending their days moving stones for pyramids. Instead, they worked in farms, temples, or affluent residences. You could advance. In contrast to other societies, a slave in Egypt had the opportunity to be set free and go on to lead a fulfilling life. Some went on to hold high-ranking temple positions or become government officials. That picture, then, of millions of slaves being whipped to construct pyramids? Unadulterated Hollywood fiction. Before the first stone was set, the workmen would have most likely gone on strike if that were true. Therefore, we can conclude that, unlike what the movies portray, the typical person's life in ancient Egypt was far less glamorous. Ghostly curses, treasure-filled tombs, and golden pharaohs are things of the past. Working, eating tough bread, drinking heated beer, and, if you were lucky, playing Senet at the end of the day were the mainstays of an average Egyptian's life. To sum up, back then, there were no alarm clocks, so you would wake up early and face the sun. For breakfast, bread loaded with crunchy sand, basically. Depending on your occupation, you might work in construction, farming, or crafting, or perhaps all three if you were a soldier. Games, music, and festivals were held for enjoyment since everyone needs a vacation. If you were a woman, too, in fact, you were entitled. more than in certain communities that developed centuries later. In other words, getting up early, working, paying taxes, and attempting to enjoy yourself in your spare time are all very similar to modern living. Just the one difference: a hippo on the Nile might have been your greatest threat rather than bills. What would you most like to experience in Egypt? Which one would you absolutely avoid? Please leave a remark. If you liked this historical journey, please click the subscribe button. You'll be receiving much more fascinating history in the future.